All right. So welcome everyone to our March SEL virtual book club. I can't believe it's the end of March. Like, where has 2021 gone? I guess it's okay though, because 2020 was like 7 decades long. So
That's right.
yeah, so we're in March. We're at the end of the month. We are super excited to have our book club this month. Just a couple things as we get started. So the meeting is recorded so that everybody can watch it later too. So if you don't want to be on screen or you don't want to talk, like, I'm here to watch the chat too. So feel free to participate that way too. If you just want to listen, that's okay too. This is super casual and like very chill. So I'm excited to be here and talk about the Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown. A couple little housekeeping things before we really get started. Of course, we're on Zoom. We've all been using Zoom now for a while. We luckily have not had any kind of security issues or anything, but if something like that happens, I'll just close this Zoom room and open a new one and send you the link. The other thing is, if you need like a CE or PD hour saying that you were here, like if you need a letter for that, just send me an email and I'll be happy to write it. I know a lot of schools are really encouraging educators to participate in kind of more like social things like this and more kind of community learning. So I'm happy to write a letter that says that you registered and send you a copy of your registration too. And the recording, I'll just send it out sometime this week. So you'll have that. So I'm Amber. I'm the director of Wesleyan Learning. And unfortunately, Greg can't be here with us tonight. He is actually doing a consult for a sports team and they have games all week. So the only time they could meet was today. So, but I'm here and we're going to talk about the Gifts of Imperfection. And Carrie and I were actually talking right before we started about how I hadn't read The Gifts of Imperfection until this. We neither of us had, but we were familiar with Brené Brown's other works like Dare to Lead and Daring Greatly, some of her works that are maybe a little bit more business focused. But this book actually just came out as the 10th anniversary. So this is one of her books that's a little older. I've got the anniversary edition. Some of you may have the one that's like black and has like the sky with the heart in the middle. That's the original cover. So I really like her writing, and I think she's got some interesting things to say about how we interact with others, but also how we interact with ourselves, which I think is really important. So I guess I'll just open up with, what did y'all think about this book? And feel free to pop in, either unmute or put it in the chat. We're very casual.
Yeah, I think there was a lot that I kind of was like, oh, I should have come at this one with a notebook because there were a lot of things to work on. But I was just peeking back through things that I highlighted. And I think one of the biggest ones that I was hoping to really share with my daughter was about how your worth is not dependent on any prerequisites, and there's nothing that you need to do to earn worth, and just kind of knowing that in yourself, there's not this whole list of things you have to achieve or be before you are worthy. And I think that's just a really great reminder that I was hoping to chat with her about and share with her, that we sometimes forget when we're on the pursuit, especially when you're in high school and thinking about 1,000 things that you have to do to get into college and to show that you've done X, Y, and Z and have 4 million extracurriculars and you've done all the community. And there's just a lot of things on that list that you have to achieve. And that's not everything of who you are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think as a like 36-year-old woman, I think that this was the book that I needed when I was like 17.
Yeah.
So I think it's cool for our students too to talk about this. I know sometimes, like, and I'm like this too when I teach, like, I admit I'm wrong, but I also try to keep that mask of like everything's cool, and like sometimes it's not cool, like sometimes things aren't perfect. And I think, you know, she doesn't come out and say it, but I think that showing that vulnerability to other people, especially people we have influence over, like our children or our students, is like hugely important for them as well as, I mean, I think it's important for us too. I agree with you. Yeah, I liked the part where she talked about gratitude, like cultivating gratitude, because I actually just started doing a coaching program where one of the things we do is we write down 3 things we're grateful for every day. And when I started, I was like, this is so hokey. Like, I am not going to do this. And because I kind of thought gratitude was for people who had everything they wanted already. And so talking about like letting go of scarcity, like that everything you want is there. And when you're grateful for the things you have, it makes you have more. Like that kind of reinforced that gratitude process that I've been going through. I thought that was really interesting. You know, and she even talks about like, what does gratitude practice look like? That's the thing that I think in this book, she really goes a little bit beyond some of the evidence, because she really does talk about like, this is how you do this practice. Like, this is how you do this, not just like, you should do this, but like, here is what gratitude practice looks like. And it doesn't look the same for everyone. I thought that was a really crucial part too. Yeah. So if you're just now joining us, feel free to hop in the chat or pop in. We're just kind of talking about like general impressions of the book right now. So, and we were just saying that we liked the chapters about gratitude and about, I really do think that's a big point of the book, is your value doesn't, like, you don't have to do something to be valuable. Like, your value is not tied to that. I thought that was a really, I don't know, it's kind of a hard lesson to learn a little bit, a little bit. I think especially like you said, for teenagers, and especially for teenage girls, I think in a lot of ways.
I think another really interesting point that I'd never really considered before was about numbing emotions, and that you can't pick which ones you numb. And her definition of what activities you're doing that are numbing were really also eye-opening for me, who spends too much time on social media doing nothing. Yeah, just making me aware of that, and thinking that, you know, if you're numbing everything, and not just picking and choosing the things that you want to numb. That was really a very interesting idea.
Yeah, I think especially because you can choose like how you know, she talks about you can choose how you react to things, and you can choose kind of how you react to your thoughts. But yeah, I also am very guilty of just like mindlessly scrolling through social media. And for me, I think that the big struggle, and she kind of touches on this, is that mindlessly scrolling through social media in and of itself is not the problem. For me, the problem is I keep thinking, oh, I should be doing something because I'm assigning my value to my productivity or to those things I'm doing.
Right.
Yeah. When really it's, you probably just shouldn't be doing this because it's not like adding anything to your life, and it's not particularly healthy for yourself necessarily. Yeah. I like the chapter on the things that get in the way, was really interesting, about like shame. Like, we're afraid to talk about it. You know, shame's that warm, I love this quote, I marked it, shame's that warm feeling that washes over us. If we want to develop shame resilience, we have to talk about why it happens.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a person who gets embarrassed really easily, like not shame necessarily, but like embarrassment, which is like like younger cousin, I think, a little bit. And leaning into that is really uncomfortable. But like we have to sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm pretty hard. It's pretty hard for me to feel embarrassed. So when I do feel embarrassed, it is hardcore. Like it's not just like a little bit. Like I would go shame all the way to shame if I've done something that I feel embarrassed about. So there's that too, of like immediately wanting nobody to know whatever that was, or not being willing to talk about that with anyone, just hoping it goes away.
When I like that she points out the difference too between guilt and shame. Like guilt is I did something bad, and shame is I am bad. And it's kind of like the difference between when you tell a kid like you're being kind of lazy, and you're like,
that's true.
It's not an intrinsic character trait necessarily.
Yeah.
So. When I like too that, like what does shame even look like? How do you know when you're ashamed? Like, how do you feel that? And how do you move past like shame into like this authentic kind of being too? I think a lot of people, especially like self-help books and like coaches, talk about like authenticity. But like, what does that actually look like? Like, I have a really hard time with the idea of like we can't be concerned with what other people think. Because like in some, like we have to be sometimes. Like if I go to a board meeting and I'm not prepared and I don't agree with anybody and I don't want to be there, like I can't act that way. Like I do care what those people think. So I think that there's a huge difference between like being authentic and just being like, oh, I don't care what anyone thinks. And I think sometimes we gloss over what that difference is. And so it's hard for like rule followers like me to be like, oh, I don't care what people think. And like, I don't sometimes, but sometimes you have to like. So,
that's different too between your job and your personal life. You are paid to care about this, and you care about every part of it if you're really invested. So yeah, part of that is what your other colleagues and customers and all the people that you interact with at work, their thoughts are an important part of the process.
Yeah. Well, and she talks about like choosing authenticity is cultivating the courage to be imperfect. And I think then sometimes we swing the other way. Like we're paid to be invested in our work, but then we also feel like we can't make mistakes or come up against challenges and everything has to be perfect. Like that's like the pendulum swings too far the other way. Yeah. And I don't think that's totally on like kind of criticize our workplaces on here because we're recording it, but I don't always think that that's on like individual employees either. I think sometimes places create a kind of like a world of there's not the courage to be imperfect. I used to work for a different place, not Lausanne. I've never felt this there, but I used to work for a place where there was a big sign when you walked into kind of like I don't know what it's called, like not the employee area, but like where we do all our like processing and stuff, where like the copier was and that kind of thing, that said like, mistakes are human, like it was like all this really positive stuff. But then if anyone made a mistake, it was like a crisis, like a huge like,
and you just like point to the poster,
right? Yeah, well, you're being berated standing under the poster, and it was definitely shame, not guilt. It was you did something wrong, and you're wrong for doing it. And I think sometimes we get caught up in this like toxic positivity of like it's okay to not be perfect, but we don't actually embrace imperfection. And that's one thing I thought she really brought up, that those are two different things. Like saying it's okay and it actually being okay are two very, very different things.
Yeah. Although it is different to say I'm imperfect because I weigh 20 pounds more than I'd like to, then I sent this letter to all the wrong people at work. Those are two different things. And I think it's fine to have two different levels of comfort with the imperfection that went on there.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. I was more embarrassed that I ordered the wrong thing when I went through the drive-through the other day than I was that I like literally set my kitchen on fire. Everybody's okay. It was a very small fire, and we did have to replace the heating element in my stove. But like, I was just like, well, things happen. I spilled grease on it. But then I went to the drive-through, and she was like, Dr. Pepper. I was like, Diet Coke. Like, you know, I was all embarrassed. And yeah, I think that we all assign kind of different levels of importance to our imperfections. Which is good.
But did you actually order? Was it your imperfection or your orderer's imperfection?
Oh, no. I definitely said Diet Coke. And she was like, Dr. Pepper. I was like, maybe I didn't say it right. Maybe I'm.
Why are you feeling embarrassed about it?
You know, the last 30
You are easily embarrassed then if they handed you the wrong thing.
I get so embarrassed about stuff like that. It's so bad. But then catching my kitchen on fire, like, that's a hilarious story. My kid's like, you okay in there? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. Like, not, you know, it's just, and like work stuff embarrasses me more than like catching my kitchen on fire. You know, I think that it's kind of interesting. I wonder if I don't know. I wonder what that says about like me, like that some things cause me more, like I struggle with imperfection in some areas more than others. Like, I think that's an interesting idea too.
Yeah, if there are other people involved that aren't your family, that's a different story.
Not that my family doesn't make fun of me, like literally 24/7. All of it, they're terrible. Yeah. Well, and I think too that she talks a little bit about like imperfection is more rampant when it's something that maybe isn't important, but is like there's a visible, like something comes out of it, right? Like me getting the wrong drink at the drive-through really doesn't matter. I just was embarrassing. Mm-hmm. But like, you know, when you're trying to finish a project or you've got a presentation, like I think, I know I do, like struggle with like that self-compassion aspect that she talks about,
yes.
about like,
yes,
just let it go out into the universe.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
definitely.
Yeah. And perfectionism is not the same thing as striving to be your best.
Right.
I think we were talking about teenagers earlier. I think during kind of like the college process and during, you know, your brains forming and all those things, like it's hard to figure out which one is which. Like,
yeah,
you know, is trying your hardest good enough, or does it have to be perfect? Mm-hmm. I always joke that I have like former gifted child syndrome, you know,
totally.
You know, I'm like, oh no, it has to be perfect before I can turn it. And it doesn't, nobody looks at anything I turn it. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's fine.
Yeah.
But that's hard when you're a kid.
That's actually really interesting that this is the name of the book, is The Gifts of Imperfection. And I was really interested in reading it because my daughter is gifted and has a little bit of perfectionism problem. And that means she doesn't have any time management because it has to be perfect. Even if it means you have 4 other things you haven't started and it's 10 p.m., we're still working on that one thing. And always looking for strategies to help her through that. And I don't think that's actually at all what this book is about. It was much more than that and much broader and more encompassing than just perfectionism. So I thought that was kind of interesting too, that it's it's a theme throughout, but it's not the central theme. I don't think it was more about acceptance and authenticity than perfectionism.
Yeah. Well, and the compassion towards yourself that comes with imperfection.
Yes.
Yeah, I really like the title. I agree with you. I don't think it's just about perfectionism, but I love the title that imperfection is a gift to yourself, basically.
Yeah.
I can't remember the poet who wrote this, but there was something about like someone gave me a box of darkness and I realized that that was a gift too. Like like pain can be a gift. And I think imperfection is a gift too, that you kind of give to yourself. Like, here's your permission to, like you said, untether your worth from your perfectionism. Like, yeah, I think, I don't know, in the first edition, I guess she wrote it in 2006, but then released it a couple of years later. But in the first edition, I don't think it had this, but in mine, it's got, in the new one, the hardback, it's got this whole thing at the end with like, and I'll send the link out when I send the video, but there's like a free online workshop about the gifts of imperfection. And it's got this, it's called integrations. And the idea is that like you write down, it's kind of like taking notes in the back, but it's like when you come across something that's important, you highlight and tag it, write the page number, and then slow down and write about these integrations. And she gives you like kind words to use with yourself. And I think that that speaks to your point exactly, that this isn't just about imperfection or perfectionism. It's also about like being gentle with yourself and being like kind to yourself too. That's the gift of imperfection. And it's so hard to be like a teenager. I had that exact same problem when I was a kid. Like I would do, or a young adult, I would do things and spend hours until they were perfect, but 10 other things just wouldn't get done. And so that's really hard, and it's hard to be kind to yourself when that happens.
Right.
Yeah. All right, does anybody else want to jump in? And if y'all are just listening, it's totally okay. Like, I can talk for like literally hours, if that's ever needed from anyone, which it's not today, but all right. Another thing that I thought was really interesting in this book, like, you know, she has all these, instead of chapters, really, it's like guideposts. And she talks about, let me get to it, about creativity. And I think that that was a really interesting chapter for me, because she talks about how you can't be creative and fear imperfection at the same time. Like you just can't. They just don't go together. And I don't know that I had ever really thought about it like that. I don't consider myself necessarily like a artistically creative person necessarily. Like I'm definitely relegated to like the stick figure realm of art. But I thought it was interesting that like you can't. She talks about, I'm not very creative doesn't work. There's no such thing as creative people and non-creative people. There are only people who use their creativity and people who don't. Unused creativity doesn't just disappear. It lives within us until it's expressed, neglected to death, or suffocated by resentment and fear. And so you can't be creative and take chances if you're not willing to have imperfections.
Yeah.
I just thought that was such a, like, I had never thought of it that way. That like, yeah, people may have more talent than me, which there are certainly artists that have more talent than me, but there's not like, it's not like creative people and non-creative people. You just are either using it or you're not. Like you're scared to use it or you're not scared to use it. And I thought that was really interesting.
I thought that chapter was, I was interested to see how men might take that chapter differently than I read it as a woman. I just like to see what their thought was on it. Her insistence that we all are creative. I'm not sure my husband's got got any creativity in him. There's nothing wrong with that. I just was really wondering about how other people might read that. But I agree with all of it, and creativity is important to me to have an outlet. I don't know. I was just curious to know how other people took that chapter from different perspectives of people who don't consider themselves to be creative.
Well, I think, she makes the point that we need to make art, and then she lists a bunch of stuff. And it is interesting because only one of the things that she lists is like traditionally male thing. So she talks about cooking, writing, drawing, painting, scrapbooking, taking pictures, collaging, knitting, rebuilding an engine, which I wouldn't think of as
interesting. Yeah,
but
I missed that.
It is. Yeah. And I wonder if it's just, this is probably like going beyond the scope of her book, but I wonder if it's because our society doesn't let men engage in things that are creative because we see these creative things as like women's work. I think back to a few years ago, there was a big brouhaha over this commercial that had this dad like playing with his daughter all day, and then he like did the laundry, and everybody was like, oh, there's his wife to help. I was like, what? Like, men can use a washing machine. Like, it's not like forbidden in some way. And so I don't know, that's such an interesting thought too. Like, I definitely took it as like, yeah, I bake stuff and that's creative, but I didn't think of any ways my husband is creative. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, well, like he loves smoking meat on the weekend, like briskets and stuff. Like that's creativity. He makes his own rubs and his own sauces, and we both like to garden, and like it's interesting that we assign kind of feminine attributes to a lot of the creative things. So that's something I want to think about now, because I hadn't really thought. I think that a lot of this book, like, honestly, I think like my husband would be like, oh, like I don't get embarrassed by anything, because he like doesn't. I'm not embarrassed by everything. But I wonder if like men would read this differently, especially when it talks about kind of using your talents. Like when we talk about creativity, what are we talking about? Like I think it could be anything. My daughter draws. Like she loves art. She loves all kinds of art, and she makes jewelry and all those kind of things. And I always think like I'm not creative because my mom's an artist, because she's so creative. I wonder how like my husband, who doesn't do any of these kind of traditionally creative things and has no interest in like scrapbooking, like how he feels about his own creativity. I'm going to ask him and I'll update everybody.
I think we're going to have to regroup in a week.
Yes.
After we make our husbands read this book.
I'm going to be like, I have a book for you. I'm going to read it and talk to book club about it. It's going to be great. You're going to love it.
Come back with your thoughts. I think well, that was really, I guess that was two different chapters on using your gifts and on creativity. So there are two kind of unique perspectives on that. But yeah, that is, I never would have thought of rebuilding an engine as creative. That seems very technical. So I don't think of that as creative. Yeah, if you do it wrong, it's not a creative task. It's there's a right way to do that one.
Right. Well, it's kind of like building IKEA furniture, which is my secret love. So
is it?
Who wants me to come build your IKEA furniture, I would be delighted.
I can't believe you said it out loud. Now you're going to get all these requests.
I have a Pinterest board of like IKEA hacks that I like build.
Yeah, I do too.
Yes, it's a whole thing. I built my daughter's bed, which is the second hardest thing to build from IKEA. And I did give myself a concussion doing it, but it's built and it's 2 years old and she hasn't fallen out of it. But like, I don't know. Like,
did you feel embarrassed about your concussion?
Well, my family has made fun of me to the point that I just feel nothing about it anymore. So
No.
you okay? You good? Yeah. I think though, like that, there's definitely a right way to do that. Like you have, for the most part, you have to follow the instructions, but it still feels creative. I've never rebuilt an engine, but I wonder if it's like, maybe if I were a sculptor, I would say the same thing about sculpting. Be like, yeah, it's creative, but there's like a right way to.
Yeah, you have to have something to hold it. Yeah, that's true.
I just showed my ignorance of sculpting there because I'm like, the right way to.
Yeah, I'm like, put the thing.
Stuff. Yeah. Art is cool. I don't know anything about it. Yeah, so it's interesting. I want to like read about creativity because I think that really struck home with me. Like even before I kind of thought about like what is creativity, it really kind of hit me that like you can't be creative unless you kind of let go of like, I mean, with IKEA furniture, like please make sure your stuff is bolted to the wall and that you put it all together correctly. And if you're rebuilding my engine, please make sure it's done correctly. But like there is kind of like an art to those things too, I guess. And imperfection has a place even when there's instructions. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I also love like kind of going back to the idea of like, especially what like teenagers and what I would tell my younger self, this letting go of self-doubt and supposed to chapter was really, I think, really powerful. Because we see a lot, I see a lot of people saying to my daughter, and I know people said to me, you should do this.
Yeah.
And that's when people who are authority figures in a way tell you that, like you think, oh, well, they must, or you're supposed to do this. Like that's really powerful, like to kids, I think. And I really liked the one of you're supposed to grow up and be a blank. Everyone's counting on it. I was like, oh, like that's why I went to law school and it didn't go well. I didn't finish law school, but that's what, that's kind of what people said. And that was really impactful to me. And I think that kind of goes along with the next chapter too, of like letting go of being cool and always in control. I am not, I don't know, I'm probably more cool than I think I am, but I'm really, really bad about like being goofy. Like my nightmare is audience participation. Like if I go to something and they're like, no, we're going to choose someone from the audience. I'm like, nope. Like, I'm just going to nope out of here. I do not want to be involved. I do not want to be in front of people. And maybe I could get over that someday. And this book kind of like said, like, maybe you could get over this someday and be like a normal human who can deal with audience.
Like it's normal. I don't want to participate either. I will definitely shrink if it's especially like a comedian thing. I don't know. I'm going to choose a seat intentionally in the back just for that reason, because I do not want you to make eye contact with me during the comedy show.
Yeah. No, I'm definitely going to find something to do with like my hands and like I'm looking around. Yeah, I don't want to be involved in it. We always go to, I grew up in Arkansas and just over the border in Missouri. My mom went to college there in Branson, Missouri, and there's Silver Dollar City, which is this big kind of pioneering theme park, kind of like Dollywood. They have this saloon show where like the saloon girls want you to come up and dance with them. And
no, thank you.
it has been, I've been going there probably annually ish since I was like 3. And I think I really have like that. If somebody asked me to list like my top 10 greatest fears, that would 100% be on it. Like the dancing with the saloon girls at Philadelphia City. Yeah. It would just.
So now you have to go. Now that you've stated it, we have to do like an intervention where you have to be in the saloon show.
Right. Brené Brown has told me that like I really need to like let go of being cool and just do it. Yeah.
I'm not sure that that's cool that you're avoiding. There's a whole other there's a whole other thing going on there in the saloon show.
Yeah. Well, and this chapter talks too about like the difference between kind of like women spoke out about the dangers of being perceived as like getting too loud. Men were quick to point out the dangers of being perceived as out of control.
Yes.
And I think that kind of goes back to that idea of like, what does society tell us we shouldn't be? So like women shouldn't take up too much space or be too loud or I went on a date with a guy who told me I had too much personality one time. Oh. I would point out that this person was a professional roller skater. Like he roller skated like competitively, but I had too much personality. But men are told like you have to be in control, and like that has to be stressful. I mean, I know it's stressful to be like to be told, oh, you're too loud or you're too much or whatever, but it has to be stressful to hear you have to be in control all the time too. And you know, being cool, like how much I've missed while pretending to be cool is a thing she brings up. And dancing with the saloon girls is not being cool.
Yeah,
and not dancing is not being cool either.
Yeah, a whole lot on there about dancing, and I don't like dancing in public. So I felt that chapter pretty deeply because that was something I enjoyed when I was a teenager. I thought that was really fun, and that was probably the last time I actually enjoyed it. You know, I may dance for one song at somebody's wedding, just not to be rude, but I'm not having fun.
Yeah, I went to my niece's wedding a couple of years ago, and she's awesome, and I really love her, but she was 22 when she got married, and I was 33 or 34, and I was like, there's a literal chasm between us today, like where we are in our lives.
A different way of dancing too.
Yeah. And she was like, oh my gosh, Amber, don't you love this song? I was like, yeah.
I'm jamming here in my head.
Right? I don't even know what's happening right now. So yeah. I think that was a good one. Yeah, that's an interesting chapter. I think that's the one that made me the most like uncomfortable. Because like I can definitely like, you know, she talks about like being still and self-compassion, like those things I feel like I can do. That's like good thought work. Like I can do those myself. But the like don't be cool and like be goofy and be like I don't know about all that.
Yeah. That's hard.
Yeah.
Hard public stuff.
Yeah, I'm still like replaying like conversations I had in like 2006 where I said something stupid. So like, you know, I think that that's so hard to, you know, to do. And then she talks too in the final thoughts. I thought this was kind of interesting. Like, even though that chapter was hard, like, what is the bigger risk? Like, is the bigger risk that I live like a really inauthentic life? Dancing with the saloon girls is not authentic for me. But like, should I be authentic or should I care what people think to the end, like to the point that I'm not living an authentic life? And for me, as somebody who has taught a lot, I think that that's especially because I've taught history before at the college level too. Like that was an important thing for me as an educator, was like, you know, if I'm not showing my authentic enthusiasm and interest and love of this, like I have to show that to my students for them to love it. What am I not showing in the rest of my life that is keeping me from being authentic, but also keeping other people from seeing the things that I love?
Mm.
And I don't know, I think that's a longer answer. Like that's something I really have to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really liked, it was a really good read, I thought. Just as like a book, I thought it was really good too.
Yeah, I didn't get it until I didn't sign up for book club initially because I was waiting for the library to have a copy of the book. And they had it, and I was like, oh, I'm not going to be able to read it in time. But it went through pretty speedy. There were things that I thought, oh, I really should stop more and think about this and think about how this applies. So I think I probably need to still marinate on it a little bit. There were things that I just finished last night, but I did think it was really interesting. And I do like her personal stories in there. I think her friend was right. It isn't all about just presenting data. It's telling her personal stories, and she's funny and willing to share and willing to embarrass herself. And that is very humanizing and makes you feel connected to her in a way of, yeah, I've totally embarrassed myself as well. So
yeah, it's definitely more conversational than like, let me tell you what I researched, which I like. Yeah, and she's got I do think it's interesting there because at the end she's got this thing, which I really like the title of this chapter, about the research process for thrill seekers and methodology junkies. I was like, that's,
yeah,
I know
I would have been willing to have read more of that specifically, like, how did you do this? How did you come to this? I think that process is really interesting as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, does anybody have any other comments or want to chat about specific parts of the book?
I just really enjoyed the book. I liked listening to you. I was making dinner, so sorry. But I loved everything that you said. For me, the chapter, the guidepost on play and rest, really, the whole book forces you to look at how you go about your life, right? And then when you reflect on your own journey, you're like, okay, what are my kids seeing? What are they feeling? What am I showing them? Like I keep having all these moments, like a perfectionist would. Oh my gosh, I gotta, which I had realized I have to just let go of that. And I think the play piece is like, I was thinking about it. I'm like, do I just not like to play anymore? You know what I mean? I'm very comfortable with the way my day flows. So I have found that sleep and rest is key. Exercise is key. I am working at letting go of comparisons and imperfections, being a perfectionist. But I have found that I don't feel the need for play, even though I love watching my kids do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, I have to figure out what play is for me.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just watching mindless television at times. And I do love that. I do have my really bad guilty pleasures that I love, and I want to do it alone. I don't,
Right.
So, but I thought it was really interesting and made me really reflect on teaching and learning for the kids, because, at some point play gets lost.
Mm-hmm.
I have a 15-year-old boy who if you let him, he would still play,
Yeah.
you know? So I thought that was really, it was very, very good in terms of pulling us out of our adult selves.
I thought
Yeah,
that one was really good too. I couldn't think of anything that I do to play and anything. I came up with one thing, and I probably only do it once a year. And I was thinking then about work, and sometimes when we say we're going to do something to play, that it immediately becomes a competition, and that to me is not play. That's not just doing it for fun, that's to beat somebody. And I never enjoy the play that we do at work because I don't like competition. I'm very personally motivated, and I want to do my best because it's my best. I'm not doing my best to beat you. So often I find that anything that we do at work is not fun because my boss is super competitive, and it's going to be a competition. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be just a board game, and it becomes super competitive. And yeah, I can't think of anything that I do that is play. And then they always say, like, go back to like whatever you like to do when you were a child, and that's the thing that's, you know, waiting for you. And I don't really want to do any of those things anymore. They're not where my interest is a 48-year-old woman. So I don't know, I need to work on the play also. I can't think of anything that I like to do that's just silly and for no reason.
When we've moved here from Los Angeles, and I think as you were talking, Soul Cycle, but again, it became an obsession for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I would do it like 10 times a week. I mean, it was my escape. I loved it. Maybe that was the closest thing. And again, it's not competitive because you don't see numbers. You don't, it is just about yourself with the community. But again, I still would like go say hi, work out really hard, and leave.
Yeah.
But I loved it.
Was it the play or the workout that, like, did you feel great because it was a workout or because it was?
No, it was fun.
Self time. Okay, yeah, cool.
It really was fun. It's like a cult. I mean, people get really into it, and I was one of those, but it was really fun for me. I looked forward to it.
Yeah.
I guess that might be the closest thing, but she was talking about more spontaneity, and that is just not my forte.
Me neither.
But I married the opposite. My husband is creative and spontaneous, and
okay.
So my kids can see both, which is good. I don't know what they're going to make of it, but
yeah. I did kind of the same thing. My husband is very spontaneous and very like, let's, do this thing, and let's, and I'm like, oh, no, we got a plan. Like, he meant to be nice, but one time he took me on like a weekend vacation and didn't tell me where we were going, just told me it was cool. And like, didn't plan anything. And we got there and I was like, I'm okay. I'm gonna keep together. And we did. We had a great time, but I was like, I would never like do that. And then I was thinking about stuff I do for like play, but all of it is something that either I'm competitive with myself about, or it produces something. Like, I kind of did the same thing with yoga. Like, I was going like 7 nights a week.
Yeah.
And like, yoga is not competitive, but I was like, I was a little competitive. But like, I love gardening, and I love like, but you still like, I don't really garden flowers, I garden vegetables, and then I can them, and then I'm like pioneer lady, like it's still producing. Like, I don't think there's anything that I do that is just to do it. It doesn't make anything. And I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, I thought that was a really important chapter. I think also I have all 3 of my kids home this year because of COVID. And watching them play and realizing, you know, I don't know if a former educator is the right word. I do some consulting, but my primary stuff is with the kids now, and I'm on a bunch of boards. So I'm still heavily involved, but like the educator in me, every day they'd come down about 9:30, not my son, but the littler ones, 5th grade and 1st grade, and they want to play. And at first I would push back, and now I'm like, my husband will call, he's like, what are the kids doing? I'm like, they're playing. It's 9:30, they're out playing. But you know, they're not on a device, they're creating, they're having fun, they're bonding. And so when I read this chapter, I'm like, I figured out how to let them do it. So I wonder if I'm just gonna let it be. But it's an interesting thing to be able to let someone else do it. But for you,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's a good point.
it doesn't feel natural anymore.
It almost feels like wrong a little.
Yeah.
Like my husband always says, like, you measure your like self-worth by your like productivity and efficiency, and like you're very efficient, and that's not a bad thing. Like that's not the thing that like you need to measure yourself by. And I'm like, but it is. Like that's hard to let go of. And I think that that's why like I can rest. Like I can take like day, like I don't have a problem with that. I can take days off and I schedule in like rest, but I don't play. Like, and I, you know, the part where they're talking about like what is play, like does that count? Like, yes, if it counts to us, but then I'm like, but nothing that I'm doing like even counts to, it's still like to do something. So yeah, I hadn't really thought about play. Like I'm good at saying no, but I'm not good at saying yes.
Right.
Like that's where I'm struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I'm the same. I can say no to stuff, but yes is hard, especially when it involves something joy, you know, like, you know, that whole talk, the whole chapter on joy, and, you know, and how she plays music all the time and they're dancing. And I love all of that, you know? So it definitely highlighted and living wholeheartedly, and how all of that is what matters more than, and it's the truth. I mean, if you reflect on your life, I'm sure the moments of holding your baby, or teaching them to put on their socks, or just watching them with, you know what I mean? Like that matters to me more than anything I've done. But yet you gravitate to this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like when people ask, I can't remember what it was, but she said, you know, people ask, what do you do? And you always reply with like your job. Like, what do you do? Oh, I'm the director of laws and learning, or, oh, I'm a PhD student.
Right.
I don't ever reply with, come look at my awesome garden, or,
right.
You know, I do like, I don't know, I like knit things. Like I don't, even though those still aren't really play, like I don't respond with those. I definitely like center my identity around like work rather than play, for sure. Yeah.
And I think she's right. The world would be a much happier place if adults played more.
Yeah. Yeah. When I even think about like, so my stepdaughter is 12, and like she and I are a lot alike in the sense of like we both have a really easy, like we both rest, like we're okay with rest and taking breaks, and we both realize that that's healthy in a lot of ways. But I think kind of about like what she does, and she doesn't really like play that much either. And I wonder, like, I hope it's not her watching me and saying I can't do things that aren't productive. But then like now I feel like, so I have to survey my husband about, you know, creativity, but I feel like I have to ask her now too. Like, what does play mean to you? Like, do you play? And I'm kind of curious to see what she's gonna say, you know, and maybe that'll influence my view of play too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, that's really interesting. When I think too that she brings up a really good point that like we can't, and kind of like we talked about at the beginning, we can't tie our self-worth to productivity and efficiency and what we
Right.
do. We just have to intrinsically have it. And maybe that's part of like letting go of things, like having that, like, I know that even if I don't get anything done today, I'm still the same person. Even if I go play for 6 hours, I'm still the same person. But I think that's an even harder step than like untying our self-worth.
Sure.
Like letting it live free maybe is an even harder thing to do.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But at least she plants the seed to help you, let it germinate to at least start the process.
Yeah.
No,
No,
that's what I really enjoyed about the book. It was like, okay, shift your brain, take a break from yourself,
and
really look at who you are and that you're not the only one. Like that was also funny.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us think that we're thinking these things and we're the only one thinking them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think too that especially with like social media, like we see other people's highlight reels.
Right.
And so we don't see other people's imperfections. And so we think like, oh, like I must be the only one with those imperfections. And like, obviously not, like rationally, you know that. But
right.
That's really hard to think like other people have these thoughts and other people have these anxieties. This one kind of reminds me of the book that we read in January, Brave Not Perfect, because she talks a lot about like hers is very focused on like women and particularly women in like business or in STEM careers. She found the woman who wrote that book founded Girls Who Code. And so she talks a lot about like women in male dominated fields. But one of the things she says is kind of like Brené Brown, like you can't do these things if you're trying to be like, you can't live your life and try to be perfect at the same time.
Right.
Kind of like you can't live your life, like you can't be creative and be afraid of imperfection at the same time. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like I have like a lot to think about.
It's a lot to think about. The part that she talked about too, as you were talking, where she was like, you can choose to overproduce, be exhausted, have your kids do 1,001 things, or you can choose, the other, but you've got to decide what you feel good about. And that's really hard, especially when you've got a kid who's getting to the age where college. I have found that I've turned into this just like, oh my gosh, you got a C. That means everything's off track. I've like really become what the worst part of what she's described. And then when she said you have a choice, that's a big reason why we're switching to this school. We think for my son, it might be a better fit for him. And you guys are in the same world of exhibitions that I'm used to, where you're not afraid to say we're shooting for, a top school. But then I'm like, okay, how do I get off this train? And is that right? Because then am I lowering my standards for him, or am I, I don't know. That just seems hard.
Yeah.
But I see it how it drives you crazy. So
yeah. My daughter is in public school right now, and I literally check her Power School, like the SIS they use, like 3 times a day. Like she's in 7th grade. Like it honestly does not matter. Like she has a D in her STEM class right now, and like I'm trying really hard just not to care, because she's not going there next year, and she, it's a whole thing, and she's trying, but it's hard to do like STEM projects virtually. And, I'm trying to like let it go and realize that like what I'm telling her is you do your best. And that's the thing that I want. I don't care what your grade is, as long as you've done your best and you're proud of your work. But then I'm secretly over here like midnight anxiety checking Power School. Like I'm not living what I'm telling her, and it is driving me crazy. So like, how do I let go of that? And I don't know how to let go of that.
Because, yeah, exactly. I mean, the words that I want to use are not even appropriate because they're judgmental words, but I'm like, I would have to accept mediocre, but I shouldn't say that word. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, that really, it really, yeah, I'm going to have to do some work because I got 2 more coming after Noah. And, you know, this level of anxiety won't, we would just watch the documentary. I had Noah and I watch on, you know, of course, the families in LA that paid for kids to take the SATs and, you know, the whole scandal.
Yeah.
And, you know, after watching it, I highly recommend it because talk about the extreme of what she's talking about. It does really help you take a moment to step back and say, this is such a rat race. But I at least, maybe because, you know, I understand the language being from there. I'm like, you want the best for your kid. Now, I would never go that far.
Right.
But when you hear how he sold it, it's almost like they didn't know they were going that far in the beginning, and then they did, and they kept going. But it's like, exactly what she said. You have to figure out how to be okay with it. That's what my biggest question was. I want to be okay with it because I see the value of not being so stressed out, letting your child be who he or she is somewhat. I mean, you got to have some expectations, and then allowing the college to be whatever it ends up being. But that is literally like scratching down a chalkboard for me. Like, that's going to be, I mean, yeah. So this book pushed me a lot.
It made me like uncomfortable, like in the good way, like in the like thinking way. But yeah, you know, I think that I always kind of like, I don't practice what I preach at all. I'm like, we should let our kids fail. And, you know, because my mom didn't let me fail ever. And so like, I don't know how to, and I get really freaked out about it. But like, oh, we got to let our kids fail, and failure is how we learn. And then I'm like, do you want me to look at your math homework? Do you want some help? Can I help you? Do you want some help? What can we do? Did you eat a vegetable? Like, you know, like I'm not letting her fail. And I think that no one told me that I was going to have to teach myself how to be a person too. Like that's been the hardest part of like being a parent, even harder than being an educator, is I don't know what I'm doing. And I thought I just wouldn't know what I was doing with her. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, and that's really hard to admit and deal with.
And how she says that in the very beginning, like, if you don't do it for yourself, how are they going to learn? And I remember all the analogy about you put the air thing on yourself in the airplane before you put it on your child. Okay, that's fine. I get it. Yeah. But I never thought about it in terms of like the social emotional stuff. It's like, I adore you. I love you. If I'm not exactly what I'm hoping you should be, it's okay because I'm still loving you through all of that. So yeah, I mean, that was very good, that point.
Yeah.
And it's opposite of what, you know, the other thing, she doesn't quite touch on this, but you know, many of our mothers were coming up. My mother was the beginning of the women's lib movement. Mm-hmm. So in order to survive, you had to be like a man in professionally. You work hard, no emotion, be perfect, you know, and so we were raised with that. So it's really like an undoing.
Yeah.
But it seems very valuable because you don't want to be stressed out and unhappy and not like, you know, comparing yourself, and all of the, you know, joy and wholehearted living is what we want. We want that for our kids.
Yeah. Yeah. I caught myself the other day saying, I'll only be 41 when Aya's 18. And then I can go like, and I listed all these things I could do. And I was like, why can't I do any of those now?
Right.
Right. Like, I don't want her to see me as like this joyless person who only does for others.
Right.
Because I don't want her to do that. And I'm always like, go far away for college. Like, go live your life. Like, don't feel like you have to stay where we are. Don't feel like you have to move. Like, go live somewhere else. And but then I don't want to, I want to model that before we get to that point too. And so I think that, yeah, kind of thinking about how I lean into my own imperfections and am vulnerable enough to show them, which a lot of her other books are about vulnerability even more. Like that was a really big takeaway for me, like as a parent too.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I want to be respectful of everyone's time. It's about 7:15. So I'm going to, does anybody have any last comments or anything about the book that they want to share? All right. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up real quick. So we just talked about The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown. Next month, we are reading a book that I actually have on campus, so I can't hold it up and show to you. But it's called Irresistible. And it's about the kind of lure of social media and how we don't just mindlessly scroll, but we actually kind of get sucked into social media in some ways, and how that's probably not healthy for us on a social emotional level. So, and we also have another SEL event coming up that's free and in the evenings on April 13th, I believe, with Dr. Danielle Jackson. She's going to be talking about something that I feel like we all are experiencing right now, which is compassion fatigue. We are all tired and we're all dealing with a lot. So how do we kind of work with that, and how do we work with that when our kids are experiencing it too? So I will send out all the links for that and for the next month's book club in the email with the recording. So thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having it.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I will see y'all at our next event and have a great night.
Thank you too.
Bye.